You don't fit in anywhere because you do this. The feeling that has no name. You have been in rooms full of people and felt completely alone. Not the kind of alone that comes from silence or distance. The kind that comes from being present, from nodding along, from laughing at the right moments and saying the right things, and still feeling like you are watching everything from behind glass. Close enough to touch, but somehow always slightly outside of it. Like everyone else received a manual you never got. Like they all know something about how to belong that was never explained to you. Like there is an unspoken language everyone else speaks fluently, and you are still trying to learn the alphabet. And the strangest part is that you cannot always explain it. There is no clear villain, no obvious rejection. Just a quiet, persistent feeling that you are slightly off from everyone around you, that you exist on a frequency no one else seems to be tuned into. That the version of you that shows up in the world is never quite the full version. And after a while, you stop trying to explain it, even to yourself. You just carry it, quietly, like a stone you have gotten used to the weight of. You stop mentioning it because you have learned that most people don't understand what you mean, and their confusion only deepens the feeling. But here is what most people never stop long enough to ask. What if this feeling is not random? What if it is not simply the way you are wired, or a cruel accident of personality, or proof that you are somehow fundamentally different from everyone else in a way that cannot be changed? What if the reason you don't fit in is not who you are, but something you do? A pattern so deep, so automatic, so invisible that you have never once recognized it as a choice. What if the wall between you and belonging is not built from the outside, but from within? This is not a video about becoming more social. It is not about confidence tricks or conversation techniques. What you are about to hear goes far beneath the surface of behavior, into the hidden architecture of why you keep ending up on the outside, no matter how many new spaces you enter or new people you meet. And more importantly, it is about what becomes possible the moment you finally see it. Not just intellectually, but in the deep, quiet place where real change actually begins. The truth is, you are not broken. But something in the way you have learned to move through the world has been quietly, consistently keeping you from the thing you want most. And that something has a name. Several names, in fact. And by the time this video ends, you will recognize every single one of them. More than that, you will recognize yourself in every one of them. You perform instead of connecting. There is a version of you that learned a long time ago that being liked required effort, that your real self, unfiltered, unpolished, uncertain, was somehow not enough on its own. Maybe it was a parent who only expressed love when you achieved something. Maybe it was a group of friends who laughed when you were too honest. Maybe it was something smaller, subtler, a look, a silence, a moment where you were fully yourself and the room went cold. Whatever it was, something taught you that the real you came with risk, and so you built another version, a version that was easier to accept, more palatable, more strategic, a version designed not to express, but to impress. You became extraordinarily good at reading rooms, at sensing what people wanted to feel around you and delivering it. You adjusted your humor, your opinions, your energy, not out of malice, not even consciously, but out of a deeply ingrained need to be received well, because being received well felt, for a long time, like the closest thing to being loved. And when you are young and the people you depend on only seem to soften when you perform, the performance stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like survival. But here is the cost of that skill. When you perform, you do not actually connect. You create the appearance of connection, while the real you watches from a distance, untouched, unseen, and quietly starving. The people around you are responding to your performance. They like the version you have constructed. They laugh with the character you play. And some part of you always knows that the warmth directed at you is not really meant for you. It is meant for the role, and the role, no matter how well crafted, is not you. That awareness creates a particular kind of loneliness that is worse than being ignored, because you are surrounded by people who seem to like you, while feeling more invisible than if you were alone. The performance works, And its success is the very thing that makes genuine connection impossible. You have become so skilled at being what others need that you have almost forgotten what it feels like to simply be what you are. Most people don't realize that the exhaustion they feel after social interactions is not introversion. It is the fatigue of labor, the effort of being someone other than yourself for hours at a time. The body knows the difference between expressing and performing, and it will always tell you which one you have been doing by how you feel the moment you walk out the door. The relief of solitude after a social event is not always about needing quiet. Sometimes it is about finally being allowed to stop. The tragedy is that the very thing you do to try to connect, the adjustment, the curation, the presentation, is building the wall. Because connection does not happen between two polished surfaces. It happens in the cracks, in the moments of genuine uncertainty, real emotion, unfiltered response. People do not connect with the version of you that has everything under control. They connect with the version of you that is real, and the real version has been hiding for a very long time, waiting quietly for the moment when it is finally safe to come out. What you are about to discover in the chapters ahead is that this performance is only one layer of the pattern. Beneath it is something even more revealing, a behavior so subtle that most people who do it have never once seen it for what it is. You test people before you trust them. There is something you do in relationships that you have probably never named. It is not cruelty. It is not manipulation. It is a kind of quiet, invisible audition that you put people through before you allow yourself to trust them. You send signals, small, deliberately ambiguous signals, and then you watch. You say something vulnerable and immediately pull back to see how they respond. You cancel plans to see if they will pursue. You share something real and then go quiet to measure the quality of their reaction. You create small storms to see if they will stay through the rain. You offer just enough to see what they do with it, and then you wait, with a stillness that looks like calm, but is actually vigilance. You are testing people, and most of them have no idea. The origin of this behavior is not mysterious. It was built in a space where trust was not given freely because it was not safe to give freely, where people who were supposed to show up did not always show up, where being too open, too trusting, too vulnerable came with a price. And so your nervous system developed an elegant solution. Before investing, verify. Before opening, probe. Before belonging, confirm. It was, in its origin, an act of self-preservation, a rational response to an irrational environment. The problem is that this testing process is invisible to the people being tested. They are failing exams they don't know they are taking, and when they fail, not because they are untrustworthy but because they are confused or busy or simply human, you register it as confirmation. See? This is what always happens. They always let me down eventually, and so the cycle completes itself. The test was designed to measure trustworthiness, but what it actually measures is the ability to pass a test no one told them they were taking. There is a reason why this pattern is so painful, not just because it perpetuates loneliness, but because it is self-betraying. Deep down, you want people to pass the test. You are not trying to confirm rejection. You are desperately hoping for proof that connection is safe. But the tests are designed in ways that make passing almost impossible. Because some part of you, without realizing it, is more comfortable with confirmed loneliness than with the terrifying vulnerability of real trust. And so the test becomes not a gateway to connection but a gate that stays permanently locked. The truth is, no one can love you past a test you have never told them they are taking. And the connections that never form because of invisible auditions are not lost because people are untrustworthy. They are lost because they were never given the chance to be trusted. The love that might have been real never had the room to become real, and you will never know from the outside of those unmade connections what might have been possible on the inside. The next layer of this pattern runs even deeper, because it is not only about what you do with other people. It is about how you have been interpreting yourself, and why you have spent so long believing that the very thing that makes you who you are is the reason you will never truly belong. You mistake depth for incompatibility. You have probably told yourself this story, that you are simply too much, that you feel too deeply, think too intensely, Need conversations that go too far beneath the surface for most people to want to follow? That you care about things other people find exhausting? That your emotional range is a burden? That your inner world is too complicated, too layered, too relentless? And that this is why connection is so hard? That you are incompatible with most people by design? That you are built in a way that makes belonging structurally impossible? This story is not entirely wrong, but it is telling you the wrong thing about why. Depth is not incompatibility. Depth is specificity. You are not too much for connection. You are too much for surface-level connection. And there is a profound difference between those two things. The environments you have been placing yourself in, the relationships you have been trying to force, the social spaces you have been inhabiting, many of them were simply not built for what you carry. And you have been interpreting that mismatch as a verdict about your worth rather than information about your environment. You have been blaming the instrument for not fitting the wrong stage. Think about what happens when someone who thinks in oceans tries to swim in a puddle. It is not that they are a bad swimmer. It is that the space is wrong. But if the only spaces you have ever known are puddles, you might genuinely begin to believe that you are the problem, that you take up too much space, that you overflow too easily, that you need to compress yourself into something smaller, something more manageable, something that fits where you are. And so compression becomes the strategy, and the strategy becomes the cage. And so you have been making yourself smaller. And the smaller you make yourself, the more confined and suffocated you feel. And the more confined you feel, the harder it becomes to show up as anything other than a muted, careful version of the person you actually are. The person who could electrify a conversation, who could make someone feel genuinely seen, who could offer a perspective no one else in the room could have offered. That person is still in there. They have just learned to wait, to hold back, to let the room set the ceiling. Most people don't realize that the relentless inner life they experience as a curse, the overthinking, the emotional sensitivity, the need for meaning, is not a malfunction. It is a feature of a particular kind of consciousness, one that is not common and therefore rarely immediately understood. But rarity is not deficiency. Depth is not damage. And the fact that most spaces cannot hold you is not an indictment of your size. It is a description of the smallness of the spaces you have been trying to inhabit. The question is not how to become less intense. The question is where you have been trying to belong, and whether those spaces were ever capable of holding you. What you are about to see in the next chapter will reveal that the problem may not be the spaces at all. It may be what you are bringing into them from somewhere else entirely. You carry old rooms into new spaces. Every relationship you have ever entered, you did not enter alone. You brought with you every room you had ever been in before. Every dynamic, every wound, every moment of being seen or unseen, valued or dismissed, held or abandoned. Your nervous system did not leave those experiences in the past. It cataloged them. It built a model of how the world works, specifically, how people work, and it uses that model to navigate every new connection. It cross-references every new person against a database of every person who has ever hurt you, and it acts accordingly, before you have even had time to think. This is not a failure of memory or imagination. It is biology. The nervous system is designed to learn from experience and apply that learning to new situations. The problem is that it cannot always distinguish between a pattern that is truly repeating and a new situation that merely resembles an old one. And so you walk into new rooms responding to ghosts. You are present in body, but part of your nervous system is somewhere else entirely. Back in the room where the wound first formed, braced for what happened there to happen again. The person in front of you says something that echoes something someone said to you 10 years ago. The tone of a conversation starts to feel familiar. Not because it is the same, but because your body has recognized a texture it associates with something painful. And suddenly you are not fully in the room anymore. Part of you has gone back. Part of you is protecting itself from something that has not happened yet, and may never happen, because it happened once before, and your system never fully recovered. The alert has been triggered. The armor goes up, and the person in front of you who meant nothing harmful at all suddenly finds themselves talking to a wall they didn't build and don't understand. You project histories onto strangers. You assign roles to new people based on the cast of old stories. The new friend becomes the old friend who left. The new partner becomes the old partner who couldn't handle your depth. The new group becomes the old classroom where you first understood that you were different. And the new dynamic begins to bend toward the old outcome, not because it was always going to go that way, but because you are unconsciously steering it there. You are the author of a story you believe you are only reading. There is a reason why this is so important to understand. Not to feel blamed for your own loneliness, but to see that the obstacle is not always in the new room. Sometimes it is in what you brought through the door. The unprocessed pain of old relationships does not stay in the past. It travels with you. It speaks before you do. It shapes how you interpret silence, how you respond to warmth, how much closeness you allow before the alarm sounds. It is the invisible passenger in every new connection you attempt. Healing is not about erasing what happened. It is about learning to tell the difference between then and now, between the ghost and the person, between a memory replaying and a reality unfolding. And that distinction is what allows you to finally stop fighting wars in rooms that are no longer at war, to finally let the person in front of you be who they actually are, rather than who your history has already decided they must be. There is another behavior beneath this one that is even harder to see because it looks from the outside like kindness. But from the inside, it is the quietest form of self-erasure there is. You shrink to avoid being too much. At some point, someone made you feel like your full self was a problem. Maybe they said it outright. Maybe they communicated it through withdrawal, through irritation, through rolling eyes or heavy sighs every time you spoke with too much feeling. Maybe it was never said at all, just felt, in the way a room shifts when you walk into it, being fully yourself and something in the atmosphere tightens. Children are extraordinarily attuned to these signals. They read the emotional weather around them with a precision most adults have forgotten. And when a child understands that their authentic expression causes discomfort in the people they need most, they make a choice, not consciously, but instinctively. They make themselves smaller. This is where the shrinking begins, not as weakness, not as defeat, as intelligence, as adaptation. You learn to modulate your enthusiasm, to edit your thoughts before speaking them, to gauge other people's emotional states before deciding how much of yourself to share. You became an expert at calibrating your presence to avoid being too much for the room. And it worked. The tension lessened. The sighs stopped. The atmosphere around you relaxed, and something in you registered this as success. You had found the formula. Be less and be safer. But the contraction never stopped at social situations. It seeped inward. You began to shrink not just in front of others, but in front of yourself. You started apologizing internally for your feelings before anyone else had the chance to find them excessive. You began preemptively editing the parts of yourself that had previously caused others discomfort. The curiosity that once felt like aliveness started to feel like too much. The emotional depth that was once just how you experienced life started to feel like a liability. Even alone, in the silence of your own thoughts, you learned to turn down the volume on yourself. The version of you that eventually walks into rooms is already reduced before the door opens, already apologizing, already compromised, already bracing for the reaction to a self that isn't even fully present yet. You have become so accustomed to the reduced version that the full version, the one with all the feeling and the depth and the fire, feels almost foreign, almost dangerous. As if being fully yourself might break something that has been carefully held together by the act of staying small. And then the belonging doesn't come. Of course it doesn't. You are in the room, but the real you is not. And somewhere in the gap between the person who showed up and the person who stayed behind, belonging becomes impossible. Not because you are not enough, but because the part of you that is most worth knowing never made it through the door. The people in the room are responding to an outline, a shadow, a carefully edited version of someone they never actually get to meet. This is what is so devastating about shrinking. It does not create safety. It creates a more comfortable form of exile. And the belonging that results from it, if it comes at all, belongs to a version of you that does not exist. It is a belonging that cannot nourish you, because it is not reaching the part of you that is actually hungry. What comes next is perhaps the deepest reframe in this entire journey, because the truth is that belonging itself has been misunderstood, and the misunderstanding has been costing you everything. You belong to a frequency, not a group. Belonging has been sold to you as a social experience, a matter of finding the right group, the right community, the right category of people who share your interests or your background or your values. And so you have spent time searching through groups, jumping in, trying on identities, hoping that this one will finally feel like home. Sometimes it almost does. Sometimes you find people who seem like your kind of people. But even then, there is often a gap, a residue of not quite, a feeling that even here among people who are supposedly your tribe, something essential is missing, that the connection is real but somehow incomplete, that you are close to belonging but not quite inside it. That is because you have been looking for belonging in the wrong dimension. Belonging at its deepest level is not a social phenomenon. It is a resonance phenomenon. It is what happens when two people, or a person and a space, vibrate at the same fundamental frequency. Not the same opinions, not the same background, not the same aesthetic or ideology, the same frequency, an underlying quality of presence, of depth, of the way they inhabit the world. And frequency cannot be found by searching groups. It can only be found by becoming so fully yourself that you emit a signal that others can recognize. A signal that is clear, specific, and uncompromised by performance. Most people don't realize that the reason they cannot find their people is not that their people do not exist. It is that they are not yet fully inhabiting the signal they are meant to send. They are dimmed, adjusted, performing, and a dimmed signal attracts dimmed responses. The people who would genuinely resonate with them, the ones who would feel like recognition, cannot find them because the real signal is buried beneath layers of adaptation, performance, and self-erasure. You are broadcasting on a frequency you have never fully committed to, and the people who are tuned to that frequency keep missing you. The truth is, when you become fully yourself, you stop being for everyone, and that feels like loss at first, because you have been trained to want to be for everyone, to be likable, accessible, comfortable for all kinds of people. But that universality is the enemy of depth. You cannot be tuned to a specific frequency and also be heard by every station. The attempt to be everything to everyone is the very thing that makes you nothing to the people who would have recognized you most deeply. There is a reason why the people who have found the deepest, most nourishing connections of their lives describe them not as found, but as recognized. As if the other person was always there, just waiting for the right signal to reach them. As if the connection did not need to be built, only uncovered. That recognition is not luck. It is what happens when you stop performing and start transmitting. When you stop asking whether you fit and start being so clearly, unapologetically yourself, that the question becomes irrelevant. And there is one more layer to this, perhaps the most confronting one. Because the barrier to belonging is not only in the behaviors you have developed, it is in an identity you have built around not belonging. And that identity is the one that is hardest of all to let go. You are loyal to your own exile. This is the part that is difficult to say, and possibly even more difficult to hear. But it is necessary. Because without this, none of the other insights will stick. There is a part of you that is not just suffering from not belonging. There is a part of you that is attached to it, that has built a home in the exile, that knows how to live in the margins, is fluent in the language of the outside, and has unconsciously organized an identity around the experience of not fitting in. The exile is uncomfortable. But it is yours. And what is yours even when it hurts can feel safer than what is unknown. This is not a character flaw. It is a psychological phenomenon. When a painful experience lasts long enough, it does not stay as pain. It becomes familiar. And familiarity in the nervous system is indistinguishable from safety. The exile becomes the known territory. And the known territory, even when it is uncomfortable, feels safer than the unknown territory of actual belonging. Because the exile, at least, will not surprise you with new ways of hurting you. You already know all of its terrain. Think about what genuine belonging would require. It would require you to be fully seen, to be accepted not as a performance, not as a carefully curated version, but as the uncertain, feeling, complex, sometimes contradictory person you actually are. That level of exposure is terrifying when your history has taught you that exposure leads to rejection. And so the nervous system makes a calculation. The pain of loneliness is predictable. The risk of belonging is not. Choose the predictable pain. At least you know what to expect from it. The loyalty to exile shows up in subtle ways. In the stories you tell yourself about why you are different. In the way you hold people at a certain distance even when they are trying to come closer. In the quiet satisfaction of being the one who doesn't need anyone. In the identity of the misunderstood soul, the lone thinker, the one who was always too complex for this world. There is a dignity in that story, a kind of pride. It carries the weight of someone who has survived being on the outside and turned the survival into a self. But it is also a cage. And unlike most cages, this one has no visible bars, because it was built from the inside. The question is not whether you are capable of belonging. You are. The question is whether you are willing to release the identity that is formed around not belonging, whether you are willing to let go of the familiar exile in exchange for the terrifying, beautiful uncertainty of being truly received. Because as long as not fitting in is who you are, fitting in somewhere will always feel like a threat. What comes next begins to close the distance between where you are and where you want to be. But it requires understanding a confusion that has been sitting at the center of your search for belonging for longer than you know. You confuse being understood with being accepted. There is a belief, quiet and deep and rarely examined, that sits at the heart of the search for belonging. The belief that if someone truly understood you, all of you, the complexity, the contradiction, the full emotional architecture of who you are, then they would accept you. That understanding is the gateway to acceptance. And so you wait. You wait for people to understand before you allow yourself to receive their acceptance. You hold belonging at a distance until the understanding is complete, until someone has seen every corner of your interior world and responded with recognition, rather than retreat. This belief feels logical. It feels self-protective. But it is one of the most effective barriers to connection that exists, because it transforms belonging into a condition that must be earned through comprehension, and comprehension, at the level you require it, is almost impossibly rare. The truth is, understanding is rare. Full understanding of the kind you are waiting for may never come, not because people are incapable of it, but because human beings are fundamentally opaque to one another. Even people who love each other deeply do not always understand each other fully. That is not a failure of love. It is the condition of being two separate, complex, interior beings in relationship. The gap between two people's inner worlds is not a problem to be solved. It is the very thing that makes connection something worth reaching across. It is the space where love actually lives, in the reaching, not the arriving. Acceptance does not require understanding. Acceptance is not comprehension. It is choice. It is the decision to hold space for someone even when they are confusing, even when they are contrary, even when they surprise you. The most powerful experiences of belonging in any human life are not experiences of being fully understood. They are experiences of being chosen despite the mystery, of someone saying, "I don't fully grasp you, but I want to stay. I cannot map the whole of you, but I am not afraid of the parts I haven't seen yet." The reason why the confusion between understanding and acceptance is so damaging is that it creates an impossible condition for belonging. You cannot be fully understood before being accepted, because full understanding only ever comes from the intimacy created by acceptance. The understanding you are waiting for is the fruit of the belonging you are refusing to enter until the understanding arrives. You are waiting outside the door for something that only exists inside the room, and the door will never open from the outside. There is a version of this behavior that goes even further, not just waiting for belonging, but actively leaving before it can fully arrive. And that behavior, the one that walks out the door before the door can close on you, is where the deepest wound often lives. You leave before they can. You have probably told yourself that you are independent, that you don't need a lot from people, that you are simply someone who has learned to be okay on your own. And there is truth in that. You have learned to be okay on your own. But if you look more closely, honestly, without the protective story, you will often find that the independence came after the distance, that you became someone who didn't need much because needing much had previously cost you something you couldn't afford to lose again. The self-sufficiency is real, but it was not the starting point, it was the survival response. There is a moment in certain relationships and a moment of deepening, of increasing intimacy, of things starting to feel real, where something in you shifts. You become aware of how much you care, and with that awareness comes a kind of internal alarm. Because caring is exposure. Caring means that the other person now has the ability to hurt you. And your nervous system, which remembers exactly what it felt like to be hurt before, does not wait for the threat to arrive. It acts preemptively. It reads caring as danger, and it begins preparing the exit before the danger has even materialized. You begin to withdraw. Maybe it is subtle, a slightly slower response to messages, a little less warmth in a conversation, an emotional unavailability that you frame as just being busy or tired. Maybe it is more obvious, a sudden need for space, a manufactured conflict that gives you a reason to be the one who walks away, rather than the one who is left. Whatever form it takes, the result is the same. You exit the relationship before it can deepen to the point where its loss would devastate you. You protect yourself from a heartbreak that has not happened yet by creating a smaller, more manageable heartbreak of your own making. And then, from the outside of the connection you just dismantled, you watch it dissolve. And part of you feels a strange, uncomfortable relief. Because the thing you feared, abandonment, rejection, not being enough, did not happen. You left before it could. What you do not always feel in that moment is the grief. The grief for the connection that was beginning to be real, for the person who might have stayed if you had let them, for the version of you that almost let someone in, for the life that was starting to form in the space between two people who were genuinely beginning to see each other. Most people don't realize that this is not self-protection. It is a more sophisticated form of self-abandonment. Because the self that is worth knowing, the one that is capable of deep love, real intimacy, genuine belonging, requires the very vulnerability that this pattern is designed to avoid. You cannot arrive at real connection without risk, and the price of eliminating the risk is the elimination of the connection itself. Every preemptive exit is a door closed on a future that will now never exist. There is a deeper truth beneath all of this, one that reframes not just the pattern, but the entire premise of what belonging is supposed to look like for someone like you. You were never meant for every room. There is a particular cruelty in the standard that most people hold themselves to when it comes to belonging. The standard that says, if you were truly okay, you would fit everywhere. You would be liked by most people. You would move through the world with ease, sliding into social situations without friction, belonging as naturally as breathing. And because you don't, because certain rooms feel wrong, certain groups feel hollow, certain social performances feel unbearable, you have concluded that something is wrong with you, that your inability to belong everywhere is proof of some fundamental inadequacy that more adaptable people simply don't have. That conclusion is false, but it is understandable, because it is the conclusion that a limited understanding of belonging will always produce. The truth is, not every room is designed for every soul. This is not a comforting metaphor. It is a psychological and, for many people, a spiritual reality. Certain people are not built for mass belonging. They are built for specific, rare, deep resonance. The kind of connection that cannot happen in large numbers or casual settings or surface-level spaces. They are instruments designed for particular kinds of music. And when they are placed in the wrong ensemble, it is not their playing that is the problem. It is the composition. The instrument is not defective. It is simply in the wrong concert hall. Most of the rooms you have tried to belong to were not designed for someone with your particular architecture of sensitivity, depth, and intensity. They were designed for a different kind of presence, more comfortable with surface, more at ease with convention, more capable of light connection without the need for depth. And you have spent enormous energy trying to become that kind of presence, trying to play music that is not yours, trying to fit into a shape that was never meant to hold you. And every time you almost succeeded, something in you rebelled, because something in you always knew that the fit was false. The suffering of not fitting everywhere is not proof of unworthiness. It is proof of specificity. The more specific an instrument, the more limited its audience, and the more profound its impact on the people for whom it was made. You are not failing to belong universally. You are in the process of finding, or becoming capable of, the specific belonging that was designed for who you actually are. The belonging that does not ask you to reduce yourself. The belonging that begins where your full self begins. This realization does not land without pain, because before you can fully receive it, you have to understand what created the need to fit everywhere in the first place. And that means going back to the beginning, back to the room where it all started. The wound beneath the pattern. Every pattern in this video, the performance, the testing, the shrinking, the withdrawal, the exile, every single one of them has a root. Not a character defect, not a personality disorder, a wound, a specific, real human wound that was created in a specific, real human moment, or series of moments, that taught you something about your own belonging. Something that lodged itself so deeply in your understanding of the world that it stopped being a belief and became a lens. A filter you forgot was there. Maybe it was a family where emotional attunement was inconsistent, where love was present but unpredictable, and you spent your early years learning to read the emotional weather of the adults around you in order to know when it was safe to need something, where belonging within your own family felt conditional in ways you could sense but never name, where you learned, before you had the language for it, that love was something you had to earn rather than something you simply had. Maybe it was a school where the social architecture was brutal and clear, and you fell on the wrong side of it early, where the message was delivered not in words but in laughter, in exclusion, in the specific silence that happens when you walk into a room and something changes, where you learned that there was something about you, something you couldn't identify but could constantly feel, that put you outside the circle, and where you spent years trying to identify and correct that thing, not realizing that the thing was never a flaw. It was just you. Maybe it was a relationship, a friendship that ended without explanation, a parent who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, a moment of genuine vulnerability that was met with dismissal or ridicule, a time when you were fully yourself and it cost you something that mattered, a time when being real had consequences that taught you, at a level deeper than thought, that real was dangerous. Whatever the specific shape of it, the wound communicated one central message. You are not quite right for this world. And that message did not stay in the past. It became a lens, a filter through which you have interpreted every social experience since. It made certain behaviors feel necessary, the performance, the testing, the withdrawal, because those behaviors were originally responses to a real threat. They made sense in the room where they were born. But you are no longer in that room. The people around you now are not the people who taught you that you didn't belong. And the behaviors designed to protect you from that old wound are now the very walls keeping you from the connection you genuinely want. Seeing this, really seeing it, without self-blame and without minimizing, is not the end of the healing. But it is the beginning. Because the next question is the one that changes everything. What have you actually been searching for, underneath all of this? What you are really searching for. Everything explored in this video, the longing to belong, the fear of being too much, the testing, the withdrawal, the exile, the performance, all of it is pointing toward something. A hunger so deep and so fundamental that most people spend their entire lives trying to satisfy it through other people, through groups, through social experiences, through external validation, and never quite reaching it. Because the thing they are actually searching for cannot be found out there. It was never out there, and no amount of belonging in the world will fill the space that is only reachable from within. What you are really searching for is the feeling of being at home inside yourself, not the feeling of being liked, Not the feeling of being understood by another person, not the warmth of a group that accepts you. Those are real, and they matter, and they are part of a full human life. But underneath all of them, driving the search is something more primal, the experience of inhabiting your own existence without apology, of being in your own skin without the constant, exhausting negotiation between who you are and who you think you need to be in order to be received, of arriving in your own life as if you belong there, not as a guest, not as someone who slipped in through a side door, but as someone who was always meant to be here. The belonging you have been searching for in every room, every relationship, every social situation. It begins here, inside, in the relationship between you and yourself. And for most people who feel they don't fit in anywhere, that relationship has been deeply compromised. Because the self you have been trying to belong somewhere with is a self that you have not yet fully accepted, a self that you still secretly believe is too much, or not enough, or somehow not quite right for this world. A self you have been subtly abandoning, again and again every time you performed or shrank or left or hid. There is a reason why certain people can walk into any room and feel a quiet sense of okayness, even when no one there knows them, even when they don't particularly fit the social dynamic. It is not confidence in the social performance. It is rootedness, a sense of being grounded enough in who they are that the room's reaction to them is not the verdict on their worth. That rootedness is not something you are born with. It is something you build, specifically through the act of returning to yourself again and again, through every pattern that pulled you away, through every moment of choosing presence over performance, truth over safety, self-expression over self-erasure. The external belonging you have been seeking has always been a reflection of the internal belonging you haven't yet found. And there is only one shift, one fundamental change in orientation that makes everything else possible. It is what the next chapter is about. The one thing that changes everything. Everything changes with presence, not confidence, not social skill, not a better performance or a more likable persona. Presence, the full unapologetic inhabitation of the moment you are in, as the person you actually are, without the internal monitoring, the self-editing, the simultaneous performance and observation that most people carry into every room. Presence is not a state you achieve once and maintain forever. It is a practice, a returning, a decision made over and over again to inhabit the now rather than manage it. Presence is rare, which is why it is so immediately felt when it arrives. You have experienced it in other people, those rare individuals who make you feel the moment they give you their attention that you are the only person in the room. Not because they are particularly charming or skilled socially, but because they are fully there, not managing your impression of them, not calculating responses, not performing, just present. And that presence creates a quality of contact, a sense of being genuinely met, that is the foundation of all real connection. It is the thing that cannot be faked, the thing that all the performance in the world cannot manufacture. The reason presence is so powerful is that it bypasses all the defenses. When you are fully present, when you have dropped the performance, stopped testing, stopped managing, stopped withdrawing, there is nothing between you and the other person but the actual contact of two real human beings. And in that contact, something happens that no amount of social strategy can manufacture. People feel safe. Not safe because you are harmless, but safe because you are real. And real things can be trusted in a way that performances never can. Real things do not collapse when you look at them closely. They hold. Most people don't realize that what they are looking for in connection is not the right person. It is the right quality of contact. And that quality is determined almost entirely by the quality of presence they bring. The relationships that have felt most alive in your life, the conversations that seem to exist outside of time, the moments of connection so real that they left a mark. All of them had presence at their center. Someone, somewhere in that exchange, had dropped the guard and just showed up. Without agenda, without performance, without the invisible distance that management creates. Presence is not a technique. You cannot perform presence, that is a contradiction in terms. It is a surrender. the letting go of the management of your own image in favor of the actual experience of being alive with another person. It begins with the decision, made again and again, every time the performance instinct rises, to be real instead of safe, to be here instead of managed, to let what is true be visible, even when visible feels vulnerable. It is the decision that every other shift in this video has been leading toward, and it rests on a foundation that the final chapter is about to give you. You were never broken. You were becoming. Every room that rejected you, every group that didn't quite hold you, every relationship that failed to contain the full weight of who you are, every moment of standing on the outside, watching through the glass, wondering what was wrong with you, every time you performed and still felt unseen, every time you trusted and got hurt, every time you left before they could leave you, every time you made yourself smaller and still felt like too much. Every single one of those moments felt, while you were living it, like evidence, like the universe confirming your worst suspicion about yourself. None of it was punishment. None of it was proof of unworthiness. None of it was the universe confirming what your deepest fear suspected, that you are fundamentally too difficult to belong to anyone, too complex to be loved simply, too damaged to find your way home. None of it was a verdict. All of it was a process. A long, painful, necessary process that was doing something you could not see while you were inside it. All of it was formation. There is a kind of becoming that can only happen at the edges. That requires the specific pressure of not fitting, not being held, not being understood by the environments that surrounded you. A tree does not develop deep roots in easy soil. It develops them in resistance, in the push and pull between the living thing and the unyielding earth. The roots go deep because they had to, because the ground was not generous, because the only way to survive was to reach further down into something real, something that could not be taken away by rejection or exclusion or the cruelty of being perpetually misunderstood. You have been reaching, all this time, through every failed belonging, every performance, every exile you maintained to stay safe. You have been reaching, not always consciously, not always gracefully, but reaching nonetheless toward something more real, more honest, more genuinely yours than anything the rooms that rejected you could have offered. Every room that didn't hold you was teaching you something about what holding actually requires. Every connection that broke was showing you something about the kind of connection that doesn't. The sensitivity that made you feel too much was sharpening your capacity for connection. The depth that made you feel incompatible was building the ground on which real intimacy can stand. The intensity that made you feel like a burden was the same force that will make you a presence that others cannot explain, but cannot forget. The loneliness that has followed you through every space has been teaching you, slowly and painfully, what real belonging actually requires, and refusing to let you settle for anything less. It has been guarding something in you that is worth guarding. You were not failing all these years. You were being made more specific, more true, more essentially yourself. And the belonging that is available to someone who has gone through that process is not the casual, surface-level belonging of a person who has never had to fight for their own truth. It is the belonging of recognition, of depth meeting depth, of finally being in a room, or a relationship, or a life, where the full version of you is not only tolerated but welcomed, where your particular frequency does not need to be adjusted for the room because the room was built for exactly the signal you send. Finally, you do not need to become someone else. You do not need to fix what was never broken. You do not need to perform or test or shrink or leave or hide in the exile. You need to come home, to the self that has been there through all of it, the one who felt everything, who held on even when holding on made no sense, who kept reaching even when there was nothing to reach toward. That self is not broken. That self is not too much. That self is the whole point. And the life that begins when you stop trying to fit in everywhere and start belonging fully to yourself. That life is not a consolation prize. It is not a second option. It is the one you were always being shaped for. It is the one that was always quietly, faithfully waiting for you to arrive.